Recording.
One time, this family came in for therapy, and they're very enjoyable family. And one of the things that I learned about them, Dave, was that the father was a chemist, and he invented this solution that eventually became a business. And the solution was a cleaning fluid. And the object that he really oriented this product toward was car windshields. And he had this idea that by having a really clean windshield, that it would, invite greater visibility. And so he gave me a sample of this bottle, this cleaning fluid, which I was really excited about using. So I went outside, later post the session, and I put this on my windshield, and it was magic. All of the dirt would come off, and so this got to be something that I did daily for a while. I was really just so taken by it. And just having that clean windshield and to be able to see so clearly was, to me, very satisfying. And one day I was out polishing the windshield, and I noticed something that I hadn't seen before. That as I was cleaning the windshield, it began to reveal all of the nicks, the scratches, and marks on the windshield that obviously wasn't going away. And I thought, oh, I just don't want to see those. I wish I didn't see these, because now it kind of ruins this whole thing of having a clean, kind of perfect, if you will, windshield. And so there were all of those marks and nicks that weren't going away. And so there I was. And so here we are, and this is how we're going to start.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. So I think we should probably introduce ourselves. We're kind of playing around with things here, but I'm Dave Kopacz. I'm a psychiatrist and holistic integrative doctor, and this is Chris Smith, who wants to introduce yourself, Chris.
Yeah, Chris
Yeah.
Smith, marriage and family therapist, mindfulness teacher, and author,
And window washer.
and window washer too.
Yeah. Yeah. So that reminds me of, the Zen idea of polishing the mirror. That the purpose of meditation or the practice of meditation, what you're doing is you're polishing this mirror, you're clearing off the different things that you don't that obscure your view of reality or obscure your view of your true self. And yet one of the things we want to pick up on today is that you can never have a perfect mirror. The perfectionism would interfere with the actual practice or process of meditation. So if you get too obsessed or neurotic about those nicks, and then you just like you're trying to fill them in, you could actually make it worse, by over focusing on that.
It was all I could see after a
Yeah.
while. And by the way, while I don't know if you could hear this, but as you were talking, the dogs in our house were barking. So here we're trying to have this podcast quiet, and
Oh,
both of my
yeah.
dogs are barking.
I couldn't hear it, but
Appropriate.
yeah, our dog might start barking too at some point. So yeah, I know that is. So that's part of the practice then is not perfection in whatever you're doing, whether it's a yoga practice or meditation practice, the practice of medicine. It's about learning. The practice is about being present and learning and using the things that bother you actually as part of your practice, not trying to eliminate them or zap them. Um, it reminds me that I went night snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and the guide said, I'm going to give you a flashlight, but don't point the flashlight at the pretty little fishes because they'll get eaten. So he said, sweep the flashlight, look at things, but if you focus in on one a little fish that you want to look at, it'll get eaten by something else. And then sure enough, like I just involuntarily would be like, look at that. And all of a sudden, this, these things. And there were these huge fish that would they were like 4 feet long and, probably 2, 3 feet high, real wide. they were like zooming around me like these hunter killers. And I was like, oh my God, I am like aiding and abetting um, the annihilation of all these cute little reef fishes. Um, so it's a double-edged sword. What we turn our consciousness on with that light of consciousness that we shine on something, we can use that actually in an adverse way that interferes with the thing that we're actually trying to do.
What are the things that help us to transition to integrating those things that maybe we wish weren't there or we wish would
Hmm.
go away, swim away? What are some of those things that can help us when we meet those nicks, those marks, those things that may be indelible in some ways? What are some of those things that can help us? It reminds me a little bit of the story of this idea of like oysters, right? They can a grain of sand can be tunneled in the very soft tissue.
Hmm.
And one of the things that they can do is, with that grain of sand over time, can fashion it into a pearl from that irritable grain of sand. And so, what are things that we might be able to do to transform the grains of sand in our life into pearls, pearls of great price?
Right, right. I mean, I guess that's it. The difference between a spiritual approach to yourself and your life and even like what we think of as a well-being approach. Um, a well-being approach could be, I want to eat the perfect food. I want to be the perfect weight. Need to do this perfect regimen of yoga and diet and exercise and emotional catharsis so that I am a perfect human being. But that, creates almost this neurotic. It creates a sort of a narcissism, first of all, of I'm better than everyone else because I do, blah, blah, blah. I don't eat that. I eat this. But it also creates this false belief that just because doing these behaviors, you're somehow a better person or even a healthier person. Um, so I think the spiritual approach is the suffering is integral to the practice. And for me too, I deal with this, and Chris, you and I both have these chronic health issues we're dealing with. And that's when I feel like I'm at my best and achieving a kind of spiritual state of being is an acceptance that what I'm going through is for a reason and purpose. And it's not about getting rid of the physical symptoms, that the work is to, yeah, sure, we'll do everything we can to be healthy and to get rid of physical symptoms. We're not trying to take on physical symptoms. But at the same time, in life, you're not going to end perfectly healthy in life. You're going to get sick and grow old and die. So, these things are kind of part of the package of being alive.
It reminds me of a Tibetan prayer that I can't remember exactly, but the idea is, may I have just enough suffering to allow me
Mhm.
to transform my life for the greater good.
Yeah,
And also, Dave, I think what you just described is really the whole idea behind the name of this podcast,
yeah,
becoming a true human being. And to me, what you just described is um, that process.
yeah. So I've got this book that I like here that I've been reading, The Way of Transformation. Let's see. How's that look?
Yeah,
The Way
this
of Transformation, Daily Life as a Spiritual Practice by this guy, Carl Fried Graf Durkheim. So it's not Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, but Graf Durkheim. And this guy's a psychotherapist and was a philosopher and a little kind of Jungian approach sometimes. And so he's looking at this thing of how do you turn your life into a spiritual practice, not just how do you have a spiritual practice and then live your life without it affecting it. How does every single moment of your life become something that you approach in such a way that you're open to it? You're open to whether it's the joy or you're open to whether it's the suffering. And so I'll read a quote from here. So he says, only to the extent that we expose ourselves over and over again to annihilation can that which is indestructible arise within us. In this lies the dignity of daring. Thus, the aim of the practice is not to develop an attitude which allows us to acquire a state of harmony and peace where nothing can ever trouble us. Which, as an aside, I'd say that's like the resilience model that we hear a lot, and sort of the health, being healthy model is as we're trying to have this harmony and peace where nothing troubles us and where we never get sick. So back to Graf Durkheim. On the contrary, practice should teach us to let ourselves be assaulted, perturbed, moved, insulted, broken, and battered. That is to say, it should enable us to dare to let our futile hankering after harmony surcease from pain and a comfortable life go, in order that we may discover, in doing battle with the forces that oppose us, that which awaits us beyond the world of opposites.
Um, so this sounds all fine and great, but when you're in the middle of it, it's horrible.
I know, I know. I love this thing of like, you know, that's why I laughed and looked at you of this assaulted, perturbed, moved, insulted, broken, and battered. I mean, that's what this chronic health stuff feels like a lot. It also feels a little bit sometimes like the political situation in the country right now.
Well,
It feels a little bit like the climate situation in the world.
it's like working with that in here and working
Hmm.
with it out here. I mean, there's no,
Yeah,
I mean, there's difference, but they're very much alike.
right.
And and I just at times struggle, particularly if the day is challenging and difficult, to remember that. And so that then to me raises this question that we're in the middle of that. I'm not saying to myself, "Oh, I'm transforming my life right now." This is usually I'm trying to resist it, and my thoughts are often negative. And so my question is, with just this, to me, being human,
Hmm.
and maybe a true human at that point,
Yeah.
because I'm not doing this in a way where I'm above it. I'm in it, miserable.
Hmm.
How do we go about moving and being in moments like
Yeah.
that?
I think, that's the thing. It's very easy to armchair philosophize and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to embrace suffering. And then, when you're like lying on the floor with gut cramps in the middle of the night and can't sleep, or, um, your whole body feels like it's tingling and on fire, like you in one of those sci-fi shows where they zap you with something, your whole body goes like this, and then you fall to the ground, when you're in the middle of that, you know, I think that's the challenge of the practice is it's the dust on the windscreen or the mirror. And our natural human ego response is going to be like, I hate this. This sucks. I want it to end. How can I escape this? How can I escape myself? And chronic illness, or you've got another term for chronic illness, don't you?
Ongoing medical conditions is a
Yeah,
persistent medical conditions is some
right.
terminology that I'm hearing.
Yeah. So when you're in that, there's no escape from it. How do you when your very body is the thing that's suffering? I mean, this is kind of what the Buddha, his sort of what set him off on his quest was the Buddha, had this sheltered life where he'd never gone into the garden of good and evil or the garden of life and death. And so he's all of a sudden he sees an old person, a sick person, and a dead person alongside the road. And he, is just shocked. He's like, is this going to happen to all of us? If this is the case, what the heck are we doing? Why are we running after all this stuff? If this is what is the truth, the reality of us, what are we doing? I know. Do you have a segue, Chris, about the garden?
I I want to go to a little something different, but I think ties into this, and it's something that is in the past, and it has something that has been very much present for me this past week. So shift to the past. Maybe 25 years ago, I began my journey with teaching mindfulness, notably mindfulness-based stress reduction. And in doing this, I began by attending a 8-day silent retreat with John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santarelli.
That sounds relaxing.
Yeah, this was my very first experience of
Mm.
long, extended practice. And it was awful. It was awful. I was missing sleep. I remember having a headache. I remember feeling at wit's end, thinking like, am I going to lose my mind? I felt sick. I mean, just miserable. And in about this was about the halfway to two-thirds point of this 8-day retreat. And one afternoon, we were, by the way, one of the things I did is I had to leave the retreat. I actually went and sat in a chapel that was silent. I just had to get away. And I felt like in doing that, I had enough stability that then I could sort of come back to the retreat, which I did. And part of what we did next was a walking meditation, very slow walking, kind of like Night of the Living Dead. And the idea is just to bring attention to the sensation of walking. And during that, and just feeling absolutely miserable, I happened to hear the sound of a cardinal. And in that moment of hearing the cardinal, um, an insight just sort of popped in my mind, like I could be in a great deal of pain and suffering and still have the capacity to take in beauty.
Mhm.
And in that little moment, I mean, the symptoms didn't disappear, but it helped me to see that suffering was not the only game in town, that it wasn't a monolith, that it wasn't all bearing, that somehow, some miraculous way, um, there was this experience that beauty could also be present through the sound of a cardinal. Now, fast forward to this week, and I'll let you take it from there. This week, there were moments of misery with the ongoing medical condition that I have been working with for almost a year. And one of the things I decided to do, which notice there's a theme of practice here. In the midst of one of those moments, it occurred to me to visualize a couple pictures. And the pictures happened to be of our grandchildren. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why these particular pictures, but one of the things that I um, experienced was in the midst of pain, also being able to feel a sense of love generated by those pictures. And while the pain didn't go away, there was also this sense of love that was generated by um, visualizing those pictures. And just as an aside, I, I could go on a rabbit hole here. There is a researcher at Stanford, Sean Mackey, if I remember correctly, who also has done some interesting research, and I just started reading it, so I'm not an expert. But the idea of love and pain, and that love can I don't know if I have the right word, but it was interesting to see my experience reflected in research from this scientist in Stanford about how love can assist, can support. That's probably a better word. Support one who might be experiencing an ongoing medical condition, one that gives rise to pain.
Yeah. Reminds me of the sustainable compassion training, McCransky. You did you go to a retreat with him? Or are you aware of
Been to
him? Or
several retreats with him,
yeah,
and as an
yeah.
aside, I played
Uh,
horseshoes with him too.
oh yeah. Oh cool. So McCransky and then Condon, who's a psychologist out in Oregon, they've got a book coming out that unfortunately I can't remember the title of right now, but I think it's coming out in June. They've got a website called Sustainable Compassion Training, and they've got a series of meditations that McCransky narrates. And there's one, I'm not sure if it's still number seven, but it was the seventh in this list. It was about using your own suffering as a way of connecting to others. And so it's like a 15-minute meditation. First, you kind of connect into whoever your mentor, kind of compassionate being is who loves and accepts you with, complete unconditional love and caring. And then you go into your own feelings and you're like, well, what is it that I'm suffering with? What is it miserable with? Or who am I worried about right now? And goes through all these things of physical health, emotional pain, worry about somebody else's health, worry about other people's like loss and grief from losing people. And then, so you go into that state where you're in, this would be analogous to the dirt on the dust windscreen type of thing. You go into that, and then from that, you sort of expand out and think about who else might be feeling something similar to this in this moment. So it takes it from, pain and illness. So many things in life can isolate you and make you feel cut off from everything, from life itself, even. And yet, that feeling of being cut off from life itself is a universal thing because illness is universal. When you're lost in your own wilderness of your body of illness, uh, you can actually use that as the thing to connect with somebody else. And I know you've been talking a lot about peer support lately, and kind of what we do, on and off camera here. And friend Jonathan Farland, who we had some similar types of things when we were both going through these illnesses. Um, you can connect to someone else who's having the similar types of chronic health issues or ongoing medical conditions, and it makes you feel less alone. And then from there, then you generate compassion. So then you've got like the compassion that you spread out to everyone else, the compassion that you give to yourself. So you come to realize that there's this when Graf Durkheim speaks of this indestructible thing that's in you, that you have to be um, assaulted, perturbed, moved, insulted, broken, and battered to find this indestructibleness within us. And like the source of caring is this thing that transcends the individual. It's something all human beings do. We can create this kind of culture of compassion and caring. It reminds me too of with Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow. I'll make this one last point and hand it to you, Chris. Um, when we were writing Walking the Medicine Wheel, Healing Trauma and PTSD, and we'd been sort of struggling. We wrote this whole book and we gave it to the editor, and the editor's like, "Where's the book about veterans?" And I said, "Oh, I've just been listening to Joseph talk about all this stuff." We went way off into all these directions. And eventually, we kind of come back and focus in on the veterans and the trauma. And then Joseph says to me, when we've almost got the whole book written, I had this vision that God, Wamachi, breath matter movement, and Tiwa, Wamachi, holds back within us, held back place of goodness.
Mm.
No matter what we've done and no matter what's been done to us, we've got this goodness within us. And I think that's the practice too, is like all this other stuff distracts us from the goodness. Then the practice is kind of coming back to look for that thing that we lost within us.
That's great. That's beautiful. We've been talking a little bit about, to some degree, some spiritual approaches and
Mm,
practices that can address this. And one of the things that was coming up for me as you were talking is I'd received an email from a Zen teacher this week, and recently her husband had died and transitioned, and she has begun writing poetry.
mm,
Um, and this reminds me of part of practice can be the creative side of ourselves. Frida Kahlo, the artist, was in a terrible accident and on her back then
Terrible pain. Hmm.
began painting. Marcel Proust also had an ongoing medical issue and wrote all these volumes of books in bed. And it reminds me a little bit. I'm in March. I'm doing a 1 day retreat that I just randomly called "Chronic Illness Meets Love." And then it was only after that I ran into that research from Sean Mackey. So I was kind of pleased that the universe sort of lined up for me there. But one of the phrases that actually I researched this quote. It comes from, I think, Pope John II. And he said this very short quote, "Don't waste your suffering."
Hmm.
So this idea for me of what one of my professors in school often said in our class, everything is usable. Everything is usable. And what may be usable for you or me or those who are listening are probably going to be different. And to me, it's like when we get together and talk, I get ideas, or when I talk with others, or it can come from a podcast, it can come from reading, but those kind of become opportunities to experiment to see what sorts of practices might be available, might be supportive, might sort of help me to sort of transform some of these assaults and these things that you mentioned. And I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you this question, which you can answer later, or you may have something that you want to talk about now. But I'm just curious, as a yoga practitioner and teacher, I'm just wondering from the world of yoga, I'm just
Well,
curious what that world might say to our discussion.
yeah. So a lot of these things that we're talking about, I think about in my book, Caring for Self and Others, which is about transforming burnout, compassion, fatigue, and soul loss. And with yoga, I was thinking about this a lot, with the windscreen. And part of we've got this terminology in our English language of there's clean and there's dirty. And within Western civilization, we've got this idea of, you know, of sin, and I don't know what would the opposite of sin be, like sacredness or divinity or purity or whatever, this idea of the
Sanctity.
sanctity, yeah. And I was thinking with Joseph Rael too, and this ceremony that he did for veterans, before going to war and returning to back home, he would take a cup and he'd take this cup. I'll get to yoga in a minute. He'd take this cup and he'd say, "Offer it to Father Sky, this empty cup, and let the light come in, fill the cup, kind of purify the cup." Then he would scoop up some soil from Mother Earth, and he'd have the veteran pour that back onto the ground, and then with one hand and the other hand, just kind of slowly ease that monk into the earth. They go to war, they come back. Before they even go into the house, they're carrying all these things within them that are not theirs. They're burdens that are beyond what an individual human should carry. So they repeat, the thing again, and then, put the soil back into Mother Earth. But I was thinking, we are we're that soil. Our bodies come from Mother Earth. So the idea of wanting to get rid of the dirt in a way is this kind of crazy anti-life idea of trying to get rid of biological life, because biological life is in the dirt and the muck and everything we eat, no mud, no lotus type of thing. Everything, on earth that's beautiful kind of comes up through the earth. Um, so we've got Mother Earth and Father Sky, and they're in a relationship, and life is what happens between this relationship. It's not about just reaching Father Sky or just being in Mother Earth. The dynamic of these two, and there's all sorts of mythologies, the Maori mythology about that the space created between um, the mother and the father. And in Egypt, I think they have similar types of stories of that originally there's no space for humans because the mother and father were pressed close together, and these different types of cultural heroes that figure out somehow to separate the mother and the father from each other so there's space to live in that liminal space between. But so getting back to yoga, there's this awesome term that I like called samvega that I came across in some of Stephen Cope's writing. And so samvega, in a way, it's a word that holds both the good and the bad together in a way that I think we have difficulty with in the English language. So samvega is, Cope says, a complex state involving a kind of disillusionment with mundane life. So that's the negative, this disillusionment, and a wholehearted longing for a deeper investigation into the inner workings of the mind and self. So here's this motivation, this positive motivation, and you can't separate the positive motivation from the negative disillusionment. And so this reminds me a lot of burnout too. That's where I kind of latched onto this thinking about burnout. Like we want to get rid of burnout. It's painful. We don't want to have it. We want to have resilience. We want to somehow prevent it. And yet, it may be that we become better practitioners by having gone through burnout and working through it. Burnout being like the dust on the windscreen. So, a yoga practitioner would see burnout or samvega as a gift that brings what Pope says, quote, an unshakable resolve to develop as a fully alive human being, end quote.
Hmm.
So I love this. It's a little bit, there's not a lot on the Samvega. I looked into it some, and I'll probably talk to Stephen Cope at some point. He was kind enough to write an endorsement for the book. And I'll loop back. Maybe we could have him on here sometime and talk more about this idea of Samvega. But it's so interesting to have a concept that is almost like the yin and yang, kind of the black and the white together, that the workings of the two together create something larger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, I think the other thing with what you're sharing with yoga and is this aspect, and with Joseph Riel, is how there are different cultural practices available from different traditions that really find creative ways of speaking to kind of what we're talking about, working with the
Mm.
nicks and the marks and just the ebb and flow of living life and the diversity of these different practices um, are available. I mean, the work of so many different of our ancestors and those before are available to us, and so I just appreciate you kind of sharing with us some of just a little bit of peek into some of these different cultural practices.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that practice is such an important piece, and it's not the attainment. The attainment isn't important. It's the practice that is important. And the place where our egos can get caught up is we think because we're doing the practice, we've attained something, but really it's just get up and do the practice, chop wood, carry water every day. It's not about stockpiling wood or carrying all the water so you never have to do it again. It's about doing it every day.
I almost feel I would add to that, Dave. I would say it's not only us um, practicing the practice, but I feel like where that becomes very rich and satisfying is if we have opportunities and also the ability to share that with others. You
Yeah.
are you are a great teacher, and as a teacher, one of maybe it's the satisfaction of that role is to be able to share that with others and to interact with and it's not just sharing, it's like we get something back from that, oftentimes, maybe more, maybe, I don't know, but that whole aspect of what sometimes is said in Buddhism, sharing the merit, is also to me an important piece of this. I mean, just like our talks, usually before and after the podcast, or that sharing the merit. I'm not sure why it's helpful.
Yeah.
But there's something about it that feels really important.
Remember, I think you attended one of these when I was doing yoga for the health of healers, when I was going through my yoga teacher training, and I still want to get back to this. I have to, full disclosure, I struggle with trying to do regular yoga. I struggle with trying to do meditation. I struggle with trying to get to the gym. Um, the only thing I don't struggle with is one time Joseph Campbell and Alan Watts were talking, and Alan Watts asked Joseph Campbell. He said, "What's your spiritual practice?" And Joseph Campbell kind of thought for a minute. And he said, "I underline things in books." Now that spiritual practice I can do. I have no struggle with like, even in my own books, I've got like so much stuff underlined and like little things to remind me, well, what's important in this, and in Durkheim, I've got all these like underlines and then also highlights, to make what's really important. No
That's
problem with
great.
that. But so what was I saying, Chris, about oh yeah, with that practice, like how I would start it off, it was for healthcare professionals who were dealing with illness. And we would get together and I would lead some kind of gentle yoga and meditation. And I started with this great story that comes out of Hinduism about the time when let's see how this was the time when the gods and the demons had to work together to get something that they wanted that was in the depths of the ocean, this sort of gift and boon. And so the gods and demons had to work together like these two opposing teams. They, instead of fighting each other, they grabbed like the world snake and they wrapped the snake around Mount Meru, whatever mountain, and put that down in the middle of the ocean. And then each of them would pull back and forth and back and forth, and it churned the cosmic ocean just like churning butter. And out of this, they're trying to get this boon, this healing boon, the most magical thing imaginable. You have to have good and evil working together. And then first thing that comes up is not the healing boon, it's this terrible poison that destroy everything. And so, Shiva this is like trying to figure out how can we stop this poison, and he like swallows it, and that's why his throat turns blue because he ingests this poison to try and save it from killing everyone else. And then a few drops of poison falling to the earth and they could destroy everything, but the snakes and the spiders and the scorpions agree to take that poison into themselves to protect everyone else. And so, but anyway, so then the next thing that comes out, all these magical beings come out and different things, but eventually they get the what is it? Is it ambrosia, Amrita or ambrosia? I think it's Amrita, maybe that comes out, and it's this healing potion. Also, the divine physician pops out. At some point they get this kind of divine physician. So good and evil working together, and the churning. So in these meditation practices, I just love this because I felt like I was churning with illness and churning with irritability and anger and depression. And then to realize the practice is not to stop the churning, the practice is to deepen the churning, to allow the good and the bad to work together. You're going to, the first thing that's going to come out is more poison. You're going to be like, why the heck am I doing this? And then all this healing stuff comes up.
That's great. You reminded me, I've been working on the second book, Hope Opens
Mm,
Doors, and
yeah.
the particular story that I've been working on this week called The Garden.
Mm,
And it was a story about when I was maybe 4 or 5, the sudden realization. And I think I remember overhearing my parents talk about somebody getting hurt or killed. I think it was killed. And and it dawned on me the very first time that people don't live forever. And although I wouldn't say this back then, but it kind of put me in this existential crisis, and I was just like worried. I was worried if my pet would die, my parents would die, I could die. And so it's like I just had all of this angst in me. And I didn't want to ask my parents because I just felt like I just didn't feel comfortable. But we had this neighbor who lived across from us. Her name was Lizzie Little, and she was little actually. And she always worked in her garden in the morning. And I was just one of those kids that would like to just go out of the house and just kind of hang out with her. I just sometimes sit and just listen, and or sometimes I'd help her pick weeds. And so on this particular day when I learned of this, it was just like I've got to talk to her and ask her, just to kind of like I wanted a second opinion
Oh,
of
oh,
so I went outside and it was morning and she was in her garden and she just I remember approaching her and just asking her and she just said very simply, Chris, people die. And that was kind of it. She went back to sort of weeding um, and kind of just going about her ordinary task. And so I like to read, if you don't mind, just a little piece
yeah,
of this. And
please.
this is what happened afterwards. I lingered in the garden, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the cool, freshly tilled soil on my feet. The sound of Lizzie Little digging and throwing purslane into the bucket was familiar and calming. I didn't expect this. Something about Lizzie's matter-of-factness, telling it like it is, and how she returned to her garden had provided an unforeseen ease. Her ease became my ease. Everything was going to be okay. Vietnamese monk and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh said, when the crowded refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But even if one person remained calm and centered, it was enough. They showed the way for everyone to survive. In the vegetable garden, Lizzie Little was my calm that day. I knew it was time to leave. I was ready. The southerly breeze carried the sharp scents of orange, red, and yellow marigolds blazing along the garden's edges. It was summer. They were on fire, just like the sun. I stepped out of the garden. The world I once knew had changed. It would never be the same. A blanket of grief settled over me, and irretrievable sorrow lodged in my chest that I would carry. And yet, there was a calm in its center, smoldering for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful, Chris. Mm. That's an indestructible. That's the held back goodness of the heart, of having that thing that you can go back to, touchstone, the sacred object in the medicine bag of your heart.
And I think, just thinking about today, um, our discussion reminds me that it's always there.
Mm. Yeah.
Although
So that's, yeah.
the
So
part
that's
that
kind of the practice. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll hold it.
no, I'm just going to say it's I think that's my realization
Yeah.
with almost a year now of this ongoing medical condition is that
Mhm.
it is always there. I wasn't sure, but it is there.
So the dust is not so much, the problem is not the dust. The problem is that you're not looking past the dust at the thing that is below it. This thing, this indestructible held back goodness, or, this place that you're describing here. So it's really just like in Becoming Medicine, Joseph Rael and I, our subtitle for that was pathways of like a living spirituality. And that's the thing is how do you get to that living spirituality? The practice itself is almost like the remembering to walk back to the garden and to see that it's there and to say, no matter what happens, I've got this thing here.
You reminded me there was a documentary of a monastery, and there was a monk. who was near the end of his days, and the interviewer went up and asked, "Do you pray?" And the monk, without batting an eye, said, "No, I gave that up a long time ago. I just live it now."
Right. Hmm. Yeah. That's the living spirituality, or life as a spiritual practice. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
I'm wondering, Dave, right now, if there's a particular practice.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of your book, and but it may not be in your book. But I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if there's a particular practice that,
Hmm.
since we're talking about that,
Yeah.
might be a way of beginning to wind down for our
Hmm.
guest today.
Yeah. This one. I'll read some of this and then I'll maybe ad lib it a little bit. So this is a transitioning practice, the creative pulsation in the apocalypse. How's that sound?
It sounds ominous.
I know. I know. So so we often think that life is meant to be stable and happily ever after. But life is in the spaces in between. Just as Joseph Rael says that God is in the spaces, not in the words. It is in the spaces that we live our lives. It's in the spaces that matter can breathe and move, giving us wama-chi, matter movement, the Tiwa word for God. Psychotherapist Dina Gluberman has explored the opportunities that burnout can provide in her book, The Joy of Burnout. She writes that joy emerges in the spaces rather than in the content of our lives. If we shift from focusing on objects and materialism to focusing on the movement and continual growth and transition in life, we cling less to the past. There's a Sufi saying, we need to die before we die, encouraging us to let go into what we are in the process of becoming. Becoming a liminal being means that you make friends with the process of letting go so that you can step into joy and maybe even Wamachi or God in the spaces in your life. Okay, so find a comfortable position. Sometimes they call it a noble posture, your head over your shoulders, over your hips, where your body is supporting itself from the inside. And even that posture, you start to connect to something inside of you that supports you rather than needing something else to lean on or lean back upon. But, you're finding this sense of inner support. I invite you to close your eyes, find a meditative space, or it may be a space of tension or churning within you. Settle into the usual way that you experience yourself contained within your body and mind. Picture something in your immediate environment and experience, looking from the perspective of a subject perceiving an object. There's you and there's what's outside of you. Now imagine a field of energy that has two poles, the object and yourself. Imagine the energy in the space between you and the object. Instead of empty space, see the way that there's still a connection of energy, a connection with your vision or sound or your senses somehow, where you and the object are in type of a relationship with each other. See if you can experience being the interconnected space between you and the object. So you're shifting your perspective slightly instead of seeing you encased within your body and that's you and the object out there. That's the it or the you. Imagine that you're actually the flow in between these two, just like the breath moving in and out. You're not just the in breath, you're not just the out breath. Breathing is both in breath and out breath. Similarly with the heart, The heart opens and it empties and it fills, it empties and it fills. The heart is not about being empty. The heart's not about being full. Heart is about being empty, full, empty, full, empty, full. So see if you can shift your identity some to being within this space between. Take a few deep breaths into this space. Next, imagine your consciousness as something not bounded by your body and brain, but as a moving energy and force that continually pulses between your body and the object. Relax into this. Maybe it's like a wave moving back and forth, like radio frequency waves, or a flickering fire, or a vibration, or a light, or colored lights. Sink into this feeling of living moment, living movement, pulsing and flickering between yourself and the object. In the Kashmiri Shaivism branch of Hinduism, there's a principle called spanda, the creative pulsation, divine activity, throbbing with life, dynamism. See if you can feel yourself as a vibration of consciousness. We could add here even a little bit of a body scan too. Feeling within your body, where is there a sense of aliveness in your body? And sometimes as you do a body scan, the place where you find aliveness is actually a place of deadness to begin with. It might be a place of pain or discomfort or tightness. And we can find as we go into that pain or tightness or density that it can open up, that it's tight because it's holding on to something, that it's closed in, but that closed in pain actually holds a tremendous power if we can somehow figure out how to release it. So maybe we need to find a place of tension and polish it with some of Chris's magical windscreen polish. Or maybe we churn it with the mountain and the snake and the good and evil pulling back and forth, churning this place within us that's holding discomfort. And then imagining, if you feel it, that's great. If you don't feel it, just imagine it for this practice. Imagining that whatever it is breaks apart, whatever that tension point is, it breaks apart. And sure, there's going to be some yucky stuff that comes out, but underneath it, there's this healing balm, this held back place of goodness, this sense of peace that Chris experienced within the garden. That within yourself you hold both the remedy, the illness, and the remedy. And for me, with this neuropathy, I'm feeling I constantly have this vibration throughout my body. So it's very easy for me to imagine this sense of spanda, of this kind of divine creative pulsation flowing through me. But maybe you can feel that yourself. See if you can sense some type of a vibration or a movement within you. Maybe it's something subtle and fine, like a movement of consciousness or a movement of energy. Or maybe it's something larger, like just the movement of your breath in and out of your body. But our bodies are constantly in a state of breath and movement through the matter of our bodies. Take a deep breath. And when you're ready, come back to your body. But imagine that your body is a doorway. Rather than a place where you live, your body is a doorway where you move in from one moment to the next. See if you can imagine and experience your body as a doorway opening so that you can step through into the next moment and closing behind you, and then opening again in front of you as you move into the next moment. You see, we really don't exist as solid objects fixed in time. We're liminal beings. We are vibrating spanda, and we're always on the move, transitioning into the next moment. Take a few easy breaths, and when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes or blink, coming back into this shared space that we have. Yeah, so that's something I try to do is this neuropathy. Is I try to think, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be able to feel the divine creative pulsation, giving me pains and burning sensations and keeping me up at night. And it lasts for a second. And then you know, I'm back to cursing my fate and the doctors and the medications and the and reality. And yeah. So what take it from here, Chris? Why don't you close us out?
Well, thank you so much for that practice. Appreciate it. Um, I'd like to end it also with a very short practice, just to offer maybe a variety for today.
Mhm.
And this practice too can be done anywhere. It can be done sitting, standing, lying down, outside, inside. When one is experiencing the vicissitudes of life, the slings and arrows, um, and here it is. The invitation is just simply to bring the corners of your mouth up.
It's a good one. Mhm.
And one thing to catch with this particular practice is notice what you feel in your body when you can bring the corners of your mouth up.
Yeah.
And that's the practice. Just from here to here, that's the practice.
You know, Chris, I was developing this idea of the yoga of burnout, which I had to cut off from this book because there was too much. I think maybe it's a separate book. Um, then when I got cancer, I thought, okay, well, this is the yoga of cancer, not just the physical postures of cancer, but working with cancer as the dirt on the windscreen, so to speak. And my first practice of the day was reading The Far Side or Calvin and Hobbes. So every day I would start with a smile and a laugh.
Yeah,
I didn't do it, but we could say this is let's just say this is how I practiced it. I would read until until I laughed out loud. So the
that's
practice would last until I got a really funny one.
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a great way for us to end this
Hmm.
podcast. There's so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
It was really a delight for me, Dave.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Tris. It was great. So, well, let's go ahead and finish up for this time, and we'll see y'all next time. Mhm. Bye.
Take care.
Let me see. I don't want to turn off. I don't want to leave. I just